Greetings sailors, welcome back to World of Warships, and today I am finishing off my look at the new Soviet cruisers with the high tiers, tiers 8, 9 and 10. Now before I start, I'm going to very quickly say one thing I haven't made clear at all up until now is with these preview ships, one or two things changed on one or two ships between us having them as preview vessels and them actually being released. Now this happened with the Soviet destroyers as well, and it wasn't a little change. They had their stealth firing capabilities quite heavily nerfed between the time that we had them for previews and that everybody else got their hands on them. That hasn't really happened with the cruisers. There's been one or two minor changes. Somebody noted on the Facebook page, because the World of Warships Facebook page shared my mid-tier video, someone said, how come the Kirov has got those quintuple launchers? Mine doesn't. And in fact, what happened is they've obviously gone away and taken off some capability or capacity of those launchers. They're now, I think, triple launchers or quad launchers or something. So these things can happen. And I've actually double checked 8, 9, 10. The only change I can find is that the Moskva got a bit less accurate. They actually nerfed the accuracy of those guns a bit. Not by a huge amount. It was something like 10 or 15 meters. Maximum range dispersion. So not massively so, but it was there. In all other regards, they seem to be exactly the same as when I played them, unless I've missed something else as well. So the tier 8, the Chapayev. This is one that actually existed. As far as I know, it's tiers 2 to tier 5 were actually built and existed, and then this existed. In fact, this was a class of cruisers, the Chapayev class, that were laid down during World War II, but not actually finally completed until the 50s. And you can actually go and look this up on Wikipedia. The Kutuzov also existed. That was one of the Sverdlov class, which was very firmly a post-war class of cruisers. And as for the rest, well, they're all either, paper designs or sort of semi-wargaming inventions. I don't know exactly, they probably are at least ones that had specifications and maybe even got as far as blueprints or whatever, but yeah, they really are in the same position as the German cruisers in that regard. They had to fill up the gaps somehow. Now in terms of its stats, this is really not so different from the tier 7. Now somebody put this in the comments of that video, and I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, but the Stors. No, that's probably wrong actually, wasn't it? It was more like Shchors. Something like that. I don't know. Russian is weird. So, yeah, it's got the same caliber of guns. It's got 4 triple turrets with the 6-inch guns. It's got the same rate of fire, 8-second reload. It's got the same turret turn time of 25 seconds. The range is, I think, a little bit better, 17.3, and that's still a really good range. It's actually only just behind the Hipper in that regard. The Hipper gets about an extra 400 meters range. The accuracy, again, is very German. It's about the same as the Hipper. It's very hard to tell dispersion-wise because it only gives you the max range dispersion. It'd be nice if, like the World of Tanks, there was a single metric that you could use across all ships instead of it being the max range, because of course that varies from ship to ship. But the accuracy does seem good. And one thing I've not actually said up until now, which again has been pointed out in the comments, is that the travel time of these shells is not half bad. So it's not like you're driving around in a class of or a line of Clevelands for these 6-inch armed cruisers. Your shells get there a lot quicker. So it's not the same experience at all, even if the firepower isn't really kind of markedly the same, markedly different rather. So yeah, the firepower feels the same. The shells do the same amount of damage. The fire chance is exactly the same at 12%. So you've got a decent chance if you put enough shells on somebody. And actually this game itself is going to be a hell of a lot more about the fire damage than anything else. But I do use AP shells at various points. Torpedoes, again, 4-kilometer torps, very short range, 65 knots, so they're pretty fast. The reload's not bad. But they really are either sort of ambush or suicide torps, being only 4 kilometers. The speed is, and I can't remember if this is slightly better or slightly worse than the tier 7. It's 33.5 knots, which is still not bad. It places it just behind the Megami, which has 34.5, and ahead of the New Orleans and the Hipper. And in fact, it's ahead of the Kutuzov as well at 33 knots. Turn radius, however, is only barely better than the Tier 7. It's 890 meters, which puts it out way ahead of everything else. The next worst is the Kutuzov, actually at 760, and then the Megami at 750, and the Hipper at 740. So, yeah, they're not. It's not great. It still handles in the water a lot like the Stors. I keep saying that. It's more like Stors, something like that. Anyway. So yeah, it still handles like a whale. The rudder shift is not great at nearly 10 seconds. Although the Hipper has a worse rudder shift time. It just turns a lot tighter. So, yeah, it's not... It doesn't feel like a major upgrade to me. It does have better anti-aircraft, but not by a huge amount. It's still not bad. It's probably on a par with the Hipper. In fact, it's probably a bit better than the Hipper, because it's got a bigger envelope. It's got the same kind of envelope as the Kutuzov, but the Kutuzov undoubtedly wins in terms of anti-aircraft. The New Orleans has got better raw DPS, but the Kutuzov just has a wider envelope, basically. So, it's okay, but honestly, it didn't feel like a huge upgrade on the Tier 7, and having mentioned the Kutuzov a couple of times, I think the Kutuzov is actually the better ship. It's got longer ranged guns, 19.1 kilometers, the firepower, the rate of fire, the turret turn are all exactly the same. It's got a better AA, it's got better torpedoes. One thing it doesn't have, however, is the ability to mount radar. We haven't touched on radar at all so far, and that's because this is the first of those ships where you can actually put on radar. Now, the Americans have or are going to get that ability as well, and it's, well, it's powerful, but it's circumstantial. A lot of people, when the announcement of radar came out, and I was looking at places like Reddit, they were kind of worried it was going to be OP, basically. But I wouldn't say that it is. It's OP in certain circumstances with somebody that knows what they're doing, but it's also really easy to waste those radar charges. Incredibly easy, in fact. Now, I have already wasted it a couple of times in this match to really no use whatsoever. The next game, you're going to get to see a good use of it. But in this game, not so much. Now, what it does is, in something like an 11.2 kilometer radius about the ship, just lights up everything. But it only lasts for about 20 seconds. So, this is, you know, when I say this is powerful but circumstantial, this is what I mean. You have to pick exactly the right moment to use it. Now, it's very, very useful against destroyers, because it's going to pick everything up on the surface around you for that 11-kilometer radius. There's a lot of the destroyers, especially the Japanese destroyers, but even things like American destroyers, where their stealth range is well inside that. They are, if they're close, and you know they're close, you can light that radar up, and there they'll be. And smoke's not going to save them. This cuts through smoke like, you know, it's like hydro search basically, except much longer ranged, and doesn't pick up stuff in the water. Radar's not going to detect torpedoes, but anything behind islands, behind smoke, whatever, you will see it clear as day for 20 seconds. But because there's such a cooldown, you have to pick exactly the right time to use it. Now, I actually do fire it off here, because the Kutuzov has put out smoke. And there you go. He's within that range, so he's lit up. So maybe this wasn't a waste so much, this particular use of it here. I do actually light up that Kutuzov, and he's now backing off behind cover. So in the right hands, in the right circumstances, you use it at the right time, it's a powerful tool. But I wouldn't say it's overpowered, because it's also really easy to waste it. Because unless you... It's almost like, unless you know for sure that there's a ship nearby that you want to light up, you can't just light it up speculatively. It's not like hydroacoustic search where you can think maybe there's stuff nearby and I'll use it and it will give me extra warning of torpedoes in the water, or maybe it'll light up a destroyer that may or may not be close. It doesn't have anything, it doesn't last anything like as long as hydro search does. So it's learning when and where to use it is going to be an important skill, and just wasting it, just pinging it off at the first time torpedoes in the water is probably not going to help you. And it's kind of compounded by the fact that these are not nimble cruisers. Like I've said, this thing moves like the Tier 7. It has the turning radius of a same tier battleship, pretty much. So, well, in fact, it's got the turning radius of a Tier 10 battleship. It's nearly the same as the Shachors, which, of course, as I pointed out, basically has the turn radius of a Yamato. So it's not like you can kind of dive into a cap and dodge all the incoming shells and light up a destroyer that may or may not be trying to cap. You can't really use it like that, not on this ship anyway. On something like the New Orleans, for instance, you might be able to. And if the Americans get this from Tier 8 upwards as well, then the fact that the New Orleans is so much more nimble, I mean, it's not quite as fast, but it turns a lot better. The rudder responsiveness is a lot better. So I think it's going to be different on the American cruisers than it is on the Soviet cruisers, just because of how the ships themselves handle in the water. That's actually quite an important component. Well, if you're going to use it offensively anyway, if you say you're on, I don't know, a map with multiple cap circles and you know there's a destroyer capping, but trying to use it at the start of a match, diving in there and pinging it off, well, you're going to have a lot of enemy guns firing right back at you. These ships just don't really turn well enough to deal with that, and they don't really have good enough armour. Well, actually, this has okay armour, though. That's one upgrade that this does have over the Tier 7, is that it has got better armour. Anyway, that match itself, I didn't even really have time to talk about it, but 7 fires set, and I actually got an Arsonist medal out of that, so yeah, it's just, I don't know, I did use the AP at points, but I was using a lot of HE there, and I did set 7 fires, which is, you know, with the rate of fire, it's and the fire chance, it's not anything like, say, the Megami's fire chance. It's not even as good as the New Orleans, but it's still good enough. And as you can see, actually the bulk of the damage there was from fires. That was nearly 37,000 damage rather from those fires, and maybe like 22k from the rest. So yeah, it plays a lot like the Tier 7. It's not necessarily a great upgrade, and it is in some ways, but the main difference is that radar capability, I feel. Next up, we come to the Tier 9, the Dimitri Donskoi, and I have to say, of the high tiers, in fact, I think of everything over Tier 6, this was my favourite. I even preferred it over the Tier 10. But I will add the caveat that it's not like I played hundreds of battles in this thing. It was only over a couple of battles that I kind of decided I preferred this over the Moskva. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that, and, well, we'll come to that when I sort of get down the stats, but first I will go over those stats and we can see how it compares to its contemporaries. Now, it's actually got 7-inch guns like the Kirov does, so you've had these kind of mid to high tier ships with the 6-inch guns that are fairly fast firing. You lose some of that rate of fire, but not a lot. But what you do gain back is more shell damage, and you've actually got, with those 4 triple turrets, so that's 2 in the front, 2 in the back, more guns than any of your Tier 9 contemporaries. And you've actually got a range that's equal with the next best, the Rune at 17.8 kilometers. This is exactly the same. And the dispersion's about the same as well. So, again, that German accuracy and range, even though they are smaller guns. The rate of fire is not actually quite as good as the Rune, but it's better than the Ibuki and the Baltimore. It's 12.5 second reload, and the turret turn time of 22.5 seconds is more than good enough to keep up with your manoeuvring. And actually that is bang on the same as the Rune as well. So all in all, it's got a nice amount of firepower available. Now, the shell damage itself isn't quite as good as the rest, but that's because they're smaller guns. But still, 4,400 per Citadel is not bad. It's not bad at all. HE, again, lagging behind most of the rest. It's actually better than the Rune because, of course, the German cruisers do not get good HE shells. These are, well, they're okay. Despite being a larger caliber, they aren't really that much better at setting things on fire than the Chapayev's guns, the 6-inch guns. That's only an extra % fire chance, and of course you've got a lower rate of fire overall, so you might not be able to be a flamethrower in quite the same way, but it's still not bad. It's not bad at all. In terms of its AA, it's alright. I think it's probably more on a par. Well, actually, having said it's alright, it's actually pretty good. It's not quite as good as the Baltimore, but it is better than the Ibuki and the Rune, and it's got quite a nice envelope. It's pretty much the same as the Baltimore. The maximum range is 5 clicks on those secondary guns that you've got, 100 mils, that are dual purpose. So the AA rating is actually, the given AA rating is actually a bit better than the Baltimore. So this actually might be the best AA cruiser at tier 9, but you can't launch a catapult fighter or a spotter plane. I should have mentioned that with the Chapayev actually. Once you get to tier 8, you lose the ability to put out the spotter plane, and you never regain it. So there's not many of these cruisers that actually have spotter planes, or well, yeah, it is just spotter planes. None of them get catapult fighters. So AA is very good on this, and it might even be worth having this in, like if you want to platoon up with somebody in a cruiser to get a good AA cover, and you're in your like Izumo or something, this would be a pretty good one to pick, because it is very good AA. It's actually better AA on this than the Moskva. Another reason why I like this over the Moskva. Torpedoes, it's damage wise it's the same. You've got 2 quintuple launchers, and they actually now have a good range. They've got 8 kilometers, so you've doubled the range of the Chapayev, but they're also rather slow. They're 55 knot torps, so they're going to take a little while to get there, but they have more utility just from having that extra range. Speed wise, it is way out ahead of, well, not way out ahead of everybody else, but it's still out ahead of everyone else. It's 36 knots in a straight line, again better than the Moskva. The Ibuki comes next at 35 knots, and the Baltimore and the Rune both have 32.5. But the real good news is your turning radius is 760 meters, and that is a vast improvement on the Chapayev at nearly 900 meters. And this actually puts you fairly in the middle of the pack compared to the rest of the tier 9 cruisers. The Ibuki's got 770, the Baltimore's got 730, the Rune's got 780. So it's not quite as good as the Baltimore, but it's still a little better than the Ibuki and the Rune. And this was probably my biggest reason overall for liking this the most. I mean, the Moskva isn't actually that bad. In fact, the Moskva gets exactly the same turn radius, but it has a slightly worse rudder shift. And actually, it does fall down slightly on the rudder shift. It's still not great. It's 10.6 seconds. The Rune is worse at 11.4, but the Ibuki and Baltimore easily beat it with times that are less than 8 seconds each. So the responsiveness is still not great, but it turns a lot tighter. It feels like it can kind of juke and jive along with the rest of the, as well as the rest of the, as good as, there we go, I'm finding the right words eventually, as good as the rest of the tier 9 cruisers. So the fact that it's not as huge as the Moskva, the fact that it turns better than the Chapayev, it's got a decent rate of fire, it's got a good kind of, you can get a nice weight of shells in the air, the turret turn time's good, it's got radar to use, it's got very good anti-aircraft, it's a nice ship. I really did like this, and the one massive fly in the ointment, and it's not even that big, is the surface detection range, which is 16 kilometers. That's pretty bad. That's worse than my Tirpitz. Now you can get, when I give these ranges, by the way, these are the base ranges. You can get these down with using the concealment system, with using captain skills. But even if you've got the concealment system, if you've got camo, if you've got the captain skills, it's still, you're still gonna struggle to get it down to anything like your contemporaries. You are still gonna get spotted before anybody else, basically. It's not great, and the Moskva only gets worse because the Moskva's such a big ship. Now in this particular game, I was actually making quite an aggressive push here with these destroyers, and I don't know if this is really representative gameplay. It's just a decent game I had in this thing. It was like the second or third game I had in this, and already, you know, that was enough to make me think, I like this more than Chapayev, and I like this more than the Moskva. So with the destroyers pushing ahead of me, we've got Izumo and a Tirpitz back there as well, I decided to try and be aggressive, and it actually worked out really well. The enemy team, we kind of ended up forcing them back around the A point, and they are pushing up a little themselves on the western flank of the map, but our team is holding their own up there as well, so we're in control of this battle, and we've got 2 out of 3 cap points, so we are well out ahead in terms of points now as well. So although Ocean's not my favourite map at all, this ended up actually being quite a nice game in terms of how it played out. So just pounding that New Orleans with some AP shells, and I've got to say, I mean, the armour on this doesn't feel as good as the Moskva, although it's kind of like the Izumo, the Moskva, and we'll get to why exactly, but the strongest armour is when you bow on towards people. You can actually bounce some fairly decent number of shells. This doesn't feel quite as bouncy as the Moskva, but it's still not bad. It's not bad at all, and it's definitely step up from the Chapayev. Although in this case, that New Orleans is firing HE shells at me, which, you know, they don't care about the armour so much. So that was a fire I wanted to extinguish rather quickly, but if I get fire again, it could be rather bad. Now, I've just spotted that there's a Fubuki, or somebody's just spotted there's a Fubuki going into B, and he's actually capping. Now, I'm firing against that Montana, and I am actually on fire again myself now for at least another 40 seconds, which is not so great. I am going to lose some health here. But I decide to, it looks like, turn away from the Montana, who is firing at me. I'm also well within range of the Iowa there, and try and do something about this destroyer in B. Now, we're still well ahead on points. In fact, we're very, very close to winning at the moment. But it would be a pity to win when there's so many enemy ships left alive when we can still do damage. So I'm circling back round towards B, which has actually been capped now, but also keeping up the rate of fire on this Montana, because the range on these guns it's good. And it's I don't know, there's just this entire ship, it's just a really nice all-round package. And I just liked most things about it. Now, I'm being fired at from the smoke by that Fletcher, but there we go, there's the radar. And he's sat still, because he's popped smoke, he thinks he's fine. This is the kind of scenario where the radar becomes extremely powerful, because I've popped out the radar and he's now in serious trouble, because he's got multiple ships around him, all firing at him. And the smoke is not going to save him at all, so he's got to get his ass out there. But it's too late, he's basically done for. So, yeah, this is when the radar is at its most useful. This is what you use the radar for, is if you know there is a destroyer or something like a Kutuzov, you know, something with smoke, and you know that you're within range, and you know that there's enough firepower around that even though that guy was full health, we just hammered him, and that was actually the final kill of the match. So, damage-wise, again, like the previous one, not a spectacular game, but not bad. Not bad, and I actually ended up with a pretty decent score. Now, our Kagero, as you can see, walked away with a 2.7k base XP. That's pretty nice. He had to be doing pretty well. There might have been some capping XP in there as well, but on the whole, yes, I felt this was a rather nice match, and there was actually a decent balance of, well, a very balanced result there. 41 hits both for AP and HE, differing amounts of damage, but again, a decent amount of fire damage as well. So the HE still has a good place on this, as with the other cruisers. But overall, this feels like a really nice balanced ship. This feels like the Budioni did at Tier 6. It feels like its contemporaries. It feels like a very good, strong, solid ship for its tier, and I do like it a lot. So, at last we come to the Tier 10, the Moskva. As you've probably seen already in other places, it's huge. It's as long as a Yamato, just about. It's not quite as wide, but yes. Now, I mentioned the Izumo earlier, and I mentioned it for a reason. It's like going from the Amagi to the Izumo. It requires a real change in playstyle, and that's exactly true going from the Donskoi to this. This doesn't really play like any other cruiser I've played. This plays more like a Tirpitz or something of that ilk. Now, you don't have the same firepower as a battleship, but you've got the size of a battleship, and it does turn all right. You know, I did mention this has the same turn radius of as the Tier 9, but it's still not you know, that's not a particularly small turn radius, and it's just such a big target broadside on that, well, you have to be careful. It's the size of this thing that dictates how you play it. Now, this first bit of footage I've got for you, this is one where I got a decent score at the end of it, but I made so many mistakes, and that was merely the first of them. You can't do what I was trying to do. You can't be an aggressive, early pushing cruiser. It's just not built for that kind of thing. And anytime you've got to turn in the presence of the enemy, you're putting yourself a lot of danger just because of the sheer size of this thing. But anyway, let's get to some stats first. Now, having said, you know, I was not playing very well in this game, you know, bear that in mind when you're watching this replay. The next replay, I play better but get a worse score, if that makes any sense. In this game, I just get away with a lot of stuff. Don't take this as how you should play this ship. Now, I haven't really mentioned hit points in the tiers 8 and 9 so far. They're basically, you know, they're not outside the normal range. The Chapayev had 37,000, which was fairly average. The Dimitri Donskoi had 43,000, which again fairly average. The Rune was way out ahead with nearly 50k. The Baltimore's got 42, nearly 43k. Vigi's got 39k. So, you know, 43k is 43.4. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. This, however, this has the same amount of hit points as a tier 8 battleship, just about 65,000 hit points. You can soak up a lot of damage, and you're probably going to need all those hit points because it's just such a big target, but it doesn't have battleship armor. Now, the armor's not bad. If you bow on, you can bounce a lot of stuff, and I think I've mentioned that already, but it takes a lot of damage quite easily. It's not like it's made of citadels like the Kirov, it's just you're so big. Now, the gun caliber is kind of funny. They're 220mm guns. It's 8.6 inches, and I think that's the same as the York, although I could be wrong. Actually, I think there might be 210mm, so it's slightly bigger, but these are, I think, if that's true, the biggest guns that you get on a cruiser, of any cruiser. So your firepower is pretty good. However, you've gone back to that 2 forward and 1 aft turret configuration, so you've got 9 guns, and the fact that 6 of those guns are at the front means that it's generally best to keep your front towards your enemies if possible, because that's where most of your firepower is. It doesn't quite have the more balanced feeling of the Dimitri Donskoi with its 2 at the front and 2 at the back. That's, again, another reason why I prefer the Donskoi. It just feels a little more all-round balanced. But this makes it more of a kind of a decent offensive ship, but you can't really push in. You actually have to keep your distance in this one. You really have to use that range. The rate of fire, now the rate of fire is pretty good. It's 10.3 second reload, which is just very slightly worse than the Hindenburg. The Des Moines is, you know, everybody knows about the rate of fire in the Des Moines. That thing can pound out a shell every 6 seconds without any captain skills. So, yeah, it's, well, not captain skills, what I'm talking about, without any equipment mountables, because I think the Des Moines can mount equipment that gives you extra turret turn for... I don't know, equipment's probably something I should have looked at more when I had this to preview, because you can't really see equipment in the... ooh, that was some nasty hits. You can't really see equipment in the tech tree. You have to actually own the ship to see what equipment it can mount. And I didn't screenshot the options, unfortunately. But... yeah, it might be a thing that's available on the tier 10s. I can't remember if you can sacrifice turret turn time for extra rate of fire. But that's, I don't know, I'm getting sidetracked. Talking of turret turn time, it's a little over 30 seconds, 33 just about. It's not bad. It's about the same as the Zao, slightly worse than the Des Moines. Definitely worse than the Hindenburg, which has got 22.5, so that's a clear winner there. But, another torpedo, well done. I was doing so well in this game. But it kind of, it makes up for it, I think. The rate of fire is good, and the range is good. And it really is the range that makes this special. It's got 19.4 kilometer range. It has got, basically, to go with those tier 8 battleship hit points, it's pretty much got, like, tier 7, tier 8 battleship ranges. So you absolutely have to use that range. The size of this thing kind of dictates how aggressive you can be at various points. As you can see, I'm in serious trouble at this stage. I'm getting focused by a lot of enemy ships there. But yeah, you absolutely have to use that range. You have to abuse that range because it's difficult getting in close. If there's a lot of enemy ships around especially, you really have to just sail around at the back and snipe from a distance. And that's not going to be to everybody's taste. Damage-wise, these are actually not quite the best damaging shells, despite being the biggest guns at tier 10. The Hindenburg gets 5,900 per citadel. This gets 5,800. However, your HE shells have gotten significantly better. You actually get almost the best fire chance. The Japanese Zhao has, as a lot of the Japanese cruisers do, the best fire chance at 19%. That's pretty damn good. This, however, is not far behind. 17% chance to start a fire with each HE shell that lands. So it's still pretty nice. This is still a dangerous ship to face, even if you're not facing broadside in a battleship. And if somebody is, you know, you could probably make good use of the AP shells. But even if they're just firing the HE at you, you might still be in difficulty because they can set fires fairly easily. In terms of AA, though, I mean, I mentioned that the tier 9 is better than the tier 10. This has basically the weakest AA of all of the tier 10s. Given the size of this thing, given how... I mean, it's not like it's particularly bad in terms of maneuverability compared to its contemporaries. Again, it seems to be the mid-tiers that really suffer from that, and the tier 8 as well. Sort of tiers 5 to 8 are the ones that really do not turn well. And although it's the same turn radius as the tier 9, it's still, yeah, it's that coupled with the size of it and the relatively weak anti-aircraft. I would absolutely recommend taking defensive AA on this over hydroacoustic search, because if a carrier comes for you, you're a big target. And the carrier players, I think it's not going to take long for the good ones at the high tiers to figure out that of all the high tier cruisers, this has the weakest AA. So you will have to be prepared for that, and you are going to need that defensive AA to give yourself a fighting chance, because your AA on its own is not going to be good enough. Now, the range of the AA is actually not bad. Your longest range guns go out to 5.7 kilometers without any kind of boost from equipment or flags or whatever. So the actual envelope of the AA is pretty good, but the DPS is it's not great. It's worse than the Zhao, and the Zhao is not noted as a good AA cruiser. And the Des Moines, of course, and the Hindenburg are both very, very good in terms of that. So this is absolutely a softer target for those high-tier carriers, so that's a thing to be aware of. You don't have any torpedoes. The tier 9 is the last of the ships that has any torps on it. Given that this is a paper ship, I don't know, maybe they could have stuck some on there, but they've decided against it for whatever reason. So you don't have that, unfortunately. Speed-wise, you are on a par with the Zhao at 34.5 knots. The turn radius I've mentioned is 760, exactly the same as the Donskoi, but your rudder shift is not great. It's 10.9. Now that's actually still better than the Hindenburg, which I think I nicknamed the Huge Manatee, and I don't think that nickname's really caught on. But you know, I'm going to stand by that one because it's the Hindenburg, and you've got to have the puns. Just because it doesn't, like, it's got that rudder shift, and it doesn't have a great turn radius. It's 800 meters, so you know it's not terrible, but it's not great. But at 760, this isn't bad. It's the sheer length of the thing that makes it feel unwieldy. The Zhao and the Des Moines, meanwhile, well, the American cruisers tend to have very good turn radiuses. The Des Moines got 770 meters, and the Zhao has 840. So the Zhao is actually the worst in this case, but it conversely has the best rudder shift at 7.7 seconds. So yeah, 10.9 is not the worst, but it's still on the long side. And then we get to surface detection ranges. Now I mentioned the tier 9 has 16 kilometers. That's what the Hindenburg has at tier 10. This has 18 kilometers as a base detection range. It's pretty bad. You're probably going to want concealment system, although I don't know. Maybe the target acquisition would be better, so you've got that extra bit of torpedo acquisition in particular. I honestly don't know which you'd be better off going with, but 18 kilometers is it's huge. It's big. You're going to get spotted at the same time that battleships get spotted, basically. So it's not great. And in terms of the air spotting, it is also the worst. It's nearly 12 kilometers air spotting at tier 10. So yeah, like I mentioned, those carriers are going to be coming for you, and they're going to spot you first with their planes as well. So that's it for the stats, really. I mean, I don't think it's a bad ship. I just think it's a ship like the Izumo, where it's just different enough from its predecessor that some people are going to love it and some people are not going to like it very much at all. And in fact, it's like the Kirov in that way as well. So this was the game I mentioned, the second game where I felt I played better but actually got a worse score. Now, the team was actually... there was more of an imbalance between the teams this time round. We really didn't have that much of a challenge. And I actually, again, trying to be aggressive at the start, you can't do that. It does not pay off. But I haven't lost nearly as much health this time round. And maybe I'm learning from my mistakes already. I mean, this was a later match than the first one we saw. Because I'm already thinking, right, I should just disengage, actually. I should not try and go forwards. I should not try and get stuck in, because it's not going to end well. So I was already starting to learn from my experiences. However, with the enemy having capped all 3 cap points, and we're not off to a great start here, I know for a fact that there is an Otago in that cap point, and possibly even a destroyer as well. And talking of destroyers, that's torpedoes. Could be Otago torps, though. So as I'm fairly close, I'm going to guess that Otago is somebody that's kitted out for stealth, because I have not spotted him. And actually, no, well, there he is by the island. It might just have been the island blocking my point of view instead. But either way, I've got to be slightly careful, because he might not be alone. And there's more torpedoes. Could still be from the Otago, though. Now, I thought I might take one of these, so I actually zoomed back in, because I saw he'd run aground. Because if I was going to take one, then I was going to take one. I was already in a hard turn. I couldn't do anything extra there. But as it was, I managed to dodge out the way of those ones as well. So that was really... I'm not going to say that was like super skillful. Dodging the first set, they were a widespread, and then dodging that set, it wasn't that difficult at that point because I was already in the turn. So he's down. I did get a couple of hits in, including a Citadel. But overall, damage-wise, this hasn't exactly been spectacular so far. But hey, the game hasn't really even started yet. But having said that, we are almost 5 minutes in. The first 5 minutes of a Warships game, though, like that's... Even though it's a quarter of the match, that still feels like the game's only really starting to kick in at that point, if you see what I mean. It's not like... I've had World of Tanks games that are over in 3 minutes. That's never going to happen in World of Warships, and some people really don't like that more slow pace, especially at the start of a match. But I don't know, it's that initial positioning and manoeuvring and who's going where that can have a big effect later on. So at this point, I decided to go forward and cap, and this is... I mean, what you do when you've got these new ships is sometimes you try things that you wouldn't necessarily do otherwise, just to see what you can get away with, to see what the ships are capable of. Sometimes you do things that you know are stupid, and other times you do things that you might try in a different kind of, you know... I've not played any of the other tier 10 cruisers, but I've played other cruisers, and you might try something that might work in another kind of a ship. Like, you might try something that might work in an Amagi in an Izumo, for instance, but because they're so different in playstyle, it's usually not going to go that well. So there's an element of that with the Moskva as well, and that's kind of what I was trying here, is just seeing how well I could do when I was being aggressive. Now, despite the enemy team initially taking all the cap circles and being now quite far ahead on points, they're not really pushing for control at all. And actually, it's at this stage when I decided to... now, I'm still on cooldown for the radar, and actually would have been useful at this point, but the Benson's out of his smoke and actually firing at me, so okay, that's fine. But, yeah, pushing through like this is not necessarily something I would have tried if I was in my Otago, for instance. But I just felt like giving it a go and seeing what would happen, because the enemy team is not... They're not really trying to take control. They've got the cap points, but they suddenly seem to be being very passive. And it's not like there's... well, it might be... I was going to say it's not like there's millions of destroyers, but actually it might be the fact that we've got more destroyers left alive, including Shimikazes. It might be that the enemy team was suddenly feeling very shy because of that. Now, that Iowa is awfully close. If I had torpedoes, if I was in the Dimitri Donskoi, I could have put some torps out and maybe been within torping distance of this guy, had a chance of actually getting some towards him. But I don't have that extra bit of utility, so I'm just going to have to dodge and weave a bit. Now, having said that the strongest armor's on the front of this thing, well, my front's not actually towards this guy, so I'm going to have to rely more on dodging at this point. So he's still fairly close range. If he hits me and gets a lot of hits, well, I'm trying to make myself a smaller target, but it can still be very painful. And the Hindenburg back there is actually trying to shoot at me also. And there we go, more incoming shells, so let's start manoeuvring. I'm just trying to get some fires going on this Iowa, basically. So I lost a turret there, but fortunately not knocked out completely. Get that immediately repaired. Still trying to set the Iowa on fire, because I know how powerful the fire damage can be in this game, especially against higher tier battleships. Well, actually, in this case, it's a lower tier battleship, but even so, you can soak up a lot of hit points that way. And it's almost just a fact of life when you're playing a battleship that you just have to think, right, I'm going to be on fire now. And it's almost trying to manage how and where and why that you allow people to do that to you if it's possible to retain any kind of control. So the range is coming in really handy here. I'm not even, this isn't like even close to the edge. Well, it's fairly close to the edge of the range, but we're not like jammed up against the edge of the range circle. So I've just been pulling back and firing and pulling back and firing, and it's only now that I'm going to come back around and start pushing forwards again, because we've now taken B. We've got some destroyer activity going on in the middle, and the enemy team seems to just be constantly being kind of pushed back towards around the sea cap, and there's only a couple of ships over here, the Hindenburg and the Iowa now. So they're falling back. They're not being aggressive, and even though they now still have the points advantage, we have 2 caps. We're getting back those points, and we're ahead on kills. So initially, not having the cap circles, it looked not great, but now it's starting to look like a rather different scenario. Now the Hindenburg is at the moment by far the more attractive target, so I'm trying to hammer him with some AP shells, and it looks like he's firing HE back at me. But this is the point where you might get to see some of that bow armour in action, because it's not only the Hindenburg that's firing at me, it's also the Iowa, or he's going to be firing at me at various points. I think, I mean, the destroyers are all now pushing up through the middle. We're actually now pushing on C as well. The enemy team is in serious disarray at this stage. So, yeah, there we go. So I actually took a hit in the superstructure, it looked like, from the Iowa, but I actually bounced some of his shells as well. This thing does have a reasonable amount of armour. And, well, he's getting close. Don't want to let him get too much closer, this Hindenburg, or he might put torps out against me. But, honestly, I don't think he's going to last that long, because I'm not the only one firing at him. There's a Benson hosing him down with HE shells there as well. So he's just about to go down, and we're now easily ahead on points. We're 100 points ahead. So I'm just going to keep pressing forward. This Iowa is now in full retreat. All the rest of the enemy team are well outside my range and almost falling back to the easternmost part of the map. There's not a lot of them left at this stage either. We've only lost 2 ships. So, and there we go. There's the Hindenburg's torps. So, yeah, at least I think that was the Hindenburg's torps. It might have been the enemy destroyer that was left alive, whatever that was. But my intent now is just to try and get some more damage if I can. So back to the HE shells and just hosing down this Iowa, see if I can't set some fires. Now, I've lost one of my frontal turrets, and I didn't really play enough games to know if these are especially squashy turrets or not, but it's not like you're going to have battleship armour on the turrets. It is still a cruiser after all. So although the frontal armour on the hull is decent, it feels pretty good, maybe this is going to suffer from frequent turret outages. I don't know. I just didn't play it enough to really get a sense of that. It might be this is a really rare occurrence, and I was just particularly unlucky. Anyway, it does mean, however, that my firepower has gone down by 1/3. My frontal firepower has gone down by 1/2. So my chances of getting this Iowa to go on fire are severely reduced. And actually, well, the Shimakaze's managed to get into a position where he's unleashed a full barrage of torpedoes. This Iowa's not going to last too much longer at all. They should be appearing any second now. So I was just kind of just still desperately trying to get a fire going just to get a bit more damage, but I was getting just little bits of HE damage basically, and there they go. Boom, he's dead. So, yeah. Unfortunately, no more fires, not really much more damage. And I actually cut that slightly early because we then ended up winning on points. So, yeah, damage-wise, that was an alright game. Only one Citadel hit with the AP shells against the Otago early on, but otherwise, the AP performance was pretty decent. Our team overall was pretty strong in this one compared to the enemy team. So, again, I don't know if this is typical gameplay. Would I have gotten away with that, making that maneuver in one of the other cruisers? I wouldn't have had the gun range. The Hindenburg is the next best, but I don't know if that would quite have the other attributes required. So maybe I just got lucky. Maybe the enemy team was just bad enough that I was able to take advantage of their weakness on that flank and push round and not have too tough of a time of it. But damage-wise, I mean, that wasn't terrible. That was something like 70k damage. And undoubtedly, it can do a lot better. I would not be surprised that if you could like break 100k with this thing easily in terms of damage. So there we go. Final thoughts on the line. They feel all right. I don't think they're overpowered. I think some of them are going to be downright awkward to use. I think tier 7 and 8 in particular. The Kirov I personally didn't like, but some people are going to love it, and I think that's exactly the same with the Moskva as well. Some people will find it very awkward to use, and they just won't like the playstyle required to get the most out of it. Other people will really like it, and they'll especially love it for its range. But you have to use that range. You can't really mix it up in the same way that you might be able to in a Zhao, for instance. So, yeah, I think Wargaming's done a pretty good job with this line overall, and I might even start grinding them myself sooner rather than later. I'm still on the way to the Yamato myself, but this feels like it would be a nice one to have a go at. So hopefully you found these useful. It's always like doing these kind of preview videos, you're never quite sure of yourself because you don't have that much time to play through them all. And so your impressions are necessarily limited by the number of battles that you've had to play. But hopefully I have played enough and gotten a good enough idea of what they're like to accurately convey that to you guys and gals that are watching this. So hopefully it has actually been useful and gives you some idea of how to deal with these ships, how to play these ships. So, if you have found this useful, you can leave any comments below, you can hit that like button, you can sub to my channel if you aren't already, and, as always, stay tuned for more.